to tonight's special book club. Why special? Well, we have an audience from the Melbourne Writers' Festival. Lovely to see you. We have two standout international guests and two books of dark, in fact, somewhat sinister hue, exploring the meeting place of power, politics and art. The first, Rupert Thompson's Secrecy, takes us to late 17th century Florence and the dying days of the once dazzling court of the Medici. While our classic is the late, great Roberto Bolaño's take on the uneasy marriage of poetry and state violence in the days of Pinochet, By Night in Chile. So let's meet our guests, starting with Marieke Hardy, Jason Steger. Our first guest is a bit of a publishing legend who blazed across the literary skies like a comet in the late 90s with his short story collection Drown, followed some years later by his debut novel, The Brief and Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, which won the Pulitzer Prize. It would take the whole show to list his awards, so I'll just mention his latest collection of short stories, This Is How You Lose Her, and how very pleased we are to welcome to the club Junot Diaz. Thank you for having me. Second guest is a writer, a broadcaster and a critic. She wrote one of my personal favourites, the saucy but historically extremely sound In the Company of the Courtesan, one of a trilogy on the role of women in Renaissance Italy. Her latest is about the Borgias and is called Blood and Beauty. Please, a round of applause for Sarah Dunant. Now, to our first book, and it's the latest from the ever-unpredictable Rupert Thompson, who introduces us to a most peculiar artist as he negotiates sex, power and intrigue in late Renaissance Florence, in secrecy.
Never before had it struck me so forcibly that I only created perfect forms in order that I might damage them. I would hack and gouge at the unblemished surfaces, and sometimes I would hit my instruments over a flame, then watch as their glowing tips sank onto waxy flesh. I was like a perverse barber surgeon operating on the bodies of the healthy to make them sick. Was it true what they said of me, that I was a pariah?
Well, there's Zammo, the wax sculptor, who is called to the Grand Duke of Tuscany's court. And what a hellhole it is, Jason.
Yeah, I was surprised by the darkness of this version of Florence. And Zammo's art is extraordinary, I think, this sort of wax work that he makes. And he concentrates entirely on the evil aspects that he sees and the mysteries which are incredibly bleak, I think.
Yes.
It's a vision of Florence that surprised me, actually.
So what, you thought it was, you know, we're going to have more domes and...
Yeah, I really, it reminded me more of Dickens's London, actually, than images of Florence that of the Renaissance or whatever, that I held in my mind.
It's a wicked place, obsessed with sex and punishment. What did you think?
Look, I enjoyed the historical aspects of it. I thought the book occasionally got bogged down in detail over story, and the story itself was a little moist for my liking.
Ooh.
A little damp, little dewy.
As in, what, too icky?
Well, it's just a bit moist and windswept, and I found it a bit, yes.
But you don't like serial killer stuff anyway, do you? I mean, that kind of thing.
I don't mind, given the right mood. No, I found that, I thought the love story lacked something at times, but the balance between the historical detail and the narrative, I thought, was sometimes quite clunky.
Juno, what did you think?
I mean, I don't know. I thought the book was, it's kind of extraordinary when you feel a writer kind of hitting on all cylinders. Like, I felt that this was a writer in the process of this book who was having an enormous amount of fun. And, you know, it's an extremely gothic book where this guy's melting in. It's a historical with a police procedural and then the kind of standard gothic stuff that's going on, which we don't usually see from male writers. And so I found it to be, for any of its defects, I thought it was kind of a, it's kind of a nutty, crazy-ass hoot, you know?
Sarah?
I think it's a rather good book, actually. I think it's a book about flesh. in all senses of the word.
Is that the sort of moist thing?
Well, I don't know quite...
Let's all not stay moist.
I really don't know what level of juice you're objecting to here, so maybe I shouldn't go there. But it's about flesh in terms of the fact that this guy creates wax that looks like flesh. Yes. And it's about flesh insofar as we're in a Florence post the Counter-Reformation, where everybody's extremely pious about flesh. In fact, they're so obsessively pious about flesh, you know they really want flesh,
yes,
but shouldn't want flesh. The trick of writing really good historical fiction is that you feel you're in a foreign country, that you really viscerally feel like the past is somewhere different, that it's the sordidness in the mindset as much as the dirt in the ground. And I think what he captures very well is this moment in late Catholicism where they're absolutely terrified of sin and flesh and obsessed with it at the same time.
We haven't actually explained the story, which is that the Duke commissions this beautiful woman, this Eve, which can only be made or cast, Zumbo says, but from a corpse. And so it is the corpse is found, and the corpse, in the true style of that time, historical romance, has a stamp on its neck which identifies something, and that is the murder mystery.
There's a fantastic race against time scene as well, where she's starting to decompose.
Yes.
And he's trying to work around her, which is, I think, the most gripping part of the book, that you can hear the...
Don't let her go off.
Yeah, you can smell her.
But which is the police procedural bit, isn't it?
And also, we all know, it's also a pretty neat metaphor for what it means to be an artist. You know, I mean, there's this sense that, like, got to get stuff in before the stuff no longer has valence. And I think that it was a kind of a neat, I mean, think about it, that couldn't have been a stranger artist to encounter, a person who casts these sort of wax simulacra. But in many ways, I felt a lot of kinship to the sort of, well, I mean,
how creepy.
But I think what we do, think about it, I mean, most artists have difficult lives not for no reason. Yeah. I mean, to delve very deeply into souls, sometimes I think can be risky for even the best and the strongest of us.
And you've got to get those verbs on paper before they go off.
Yeah. So, Juno, you are the Gaetano Zumbo of modern American fiction.
The exact opposite. I don't have the guts this guy does. This guy's hardcore.
And that's why I'd agree with you. With all this going on, really, the love story doesn't have a chance, does it?
No, but I can see why it's necessary.
Oh, it's completely
and yet
essential,
it's very cumbersome, I think. I mean, it's...
Well, you've got to have some purity amid all of this corruption, haven't you? There's got, in order to bring the corruption out, bring the decay out.
Maybe that's where I found the Dewiness, though, that every time they got together, I thought, oh, God, you know, it's those two were going to be gazing moonily at each other for a few pages, and then the real story began again.
I don't think he writes women well in this book, to be honest.
No.
I think that there's also the fact that the women characters are, you know, undercooked. Whether it's the mom opening, the sort of framework character, and, you know, sometimes it happens. You know, especially for a male writer, I think that if you don't adjust for how poorly men tend to write women, the default setting is these kind of weak, sort of ghostly figures. I mean, he does better describing dead women than he does live women. And that's not going to work. That's just not going to work, yo.
He's right. In fact, the women aren't strong. They aren't strong. That's not his forte. What he is brilliant at is, like I said, almost like pastiching. But the problem with that is that sometimes I think he just goes over the top. So I have to say, towards the end of the book, when the evil monk is riding with his black cape, you know, flying behind him, with the instruments of torture clunking in the front and the brazier on top of his piebald horse.
That was too much?
I thought...
You're funny, man. That broke the spell. Wow.
Well, the 4-foot sword, too. I hadn't mentioned that.
Man, I don't know.
Is that not too much?
I feel like if you're going to be in for the dead body wax making, you're going to be in.
You've got to take the brazier.
Yeah, man. Like, come on now.
I imagined, having read your work, that nothing could be further from late Renaissance Italy, and I thought you'd hate this book. I mean, I didn't choose it for that reason, but I thought you would.
I'm sure we all feel this way. You know, once you've done the labor of writing a book, I have to tell you, the heavy lifting that this author did, I found commendable, and the fact that he held me throughout. And again, I guess I'm a reader who is just pardons books' defects because no book is perfect. And the books we tend to love, it's not because the book is perfect, it's because we're generous towards its defects. Yeah. And so this book fell in for me, my historical training, my sort of a love of the Gothic, and the fact that, you know, even though the gals were weak as hell, I found the voice very compelling, and this kind of desperate, twisted dude. You know, I felt like he understood him well.
And you're right, in fact, while the women aren't so great in Thompson's book, he's awfully good at desperate, twisted dudes. He does that. He does that really well.
It's a measure of the book's success, really, that clearly Thompson has gone out. I don't know what came first, but it seems that he's seen this art or heard about this artist, seen the physical manifestation of it, and then created a very successful world around it. It doesn't seem self-indulgent. It doesn't seem like he's just seen a piece of art and then tried to pull together a story. It works. It works as a piece, and it works that it's been inspired by something small, and I think that's very commendable.
And not 900 pages.
Yes. That's a
Can
big
we
plus,
agree,
isn't
like, it's not bad in the day of, like, page inflation that we have a book that's under 900 pages?
Absolutely.
I was like,
And
yay.
I'd just like to say that
And looks so pretty.
I was so interested in it that I was reading it in the bar.
Yes, you can tell.
And I always think that's a good sign.
The bar
See?
test.
Wet,
Bottoms
wet,
up,
wet.
darling.
That's
Yeah.
And you're a thumbs up too, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
well, half a thumb anyway.
No.
He's always half a thumb.
And the strange
I've-
thing... They quarrel all the time,
You
Jim,
too,
all the
man.
time.
I'm like, y'all related?
Time now to look at what else we've been reading over this past month. And start with you, Marie.
Well, I had the pleasure of reading in a row all three of the first Ripley novels, and it just made me sad that the internet has ruined crime fiction. I mean, it couldn't be done now, not only him swanning about drinking port and eating cucumber sandwiches while he sort of stabs someone to death, but, you know, people look on Facebook. You're not Dickie Greenleaf. I've seen the photo on the internet. They'd follow him. It'd be easy to follow his flights. He's always on trains. People would track him. And I just loved that it was free of technology. It made me very happy.
I'm reading this wonderful book called 1913 by Florian Illies, and it's all about Vienna, Munich, Berlin, Paris, 1913. There's all this modernism going on, and it's all going to come to a terrible end. It's fascinating. It's really good, and it's very witty as well. Stalin, Hitler, and Tito being in Vienna at the same time, and he speculates that Stalin and Hitler, who used to walk in the gardens of Schönbrunn, walked past each other. You know, it's great.
Love that. Gino.
I've been reading Victoria Lagrazia's this crazy cultural history called Irresistible Empires, about how Americans' sort of consumer habits invade and transform European consumer habits. It actually gives you an entirely different history of American and European relationship through things like the safety razor.
I'm reading a book that was written in 1513. In fact, it was being written as we speak 500 years ago in a farmhouse outside Florence, and it was written by a civil servant who'd lost his job, been tortured and thrown into exile, and it's a calling card to try and get his job back. And it's a book called Il Principe, The Prince, by Niccolò Machiavelli. And the reason I'm reading it is because the next volume of my novel on the Borgias has Machiavelli meeting Cesare Borgia. And we actually have descriptions of that meeting that Machiavelli wrote down as a character study of this extraordinary sociopathic general of the Borgia family. And of course, later he goes on to use him as an example of what you need to do to be the perfect prince.
Beautiful. Well, when you come back to Australia, bring it and we can go through it. Because everyone, we all think we know the prince, but not many of us really
and it's
do.
not hard to read.
Yeah.
Really.
I only know the Little Prince.
It's very sweet, there. I'm moving into the future. I'm moving into the future, 75 years into the future or so, with Alexis Wright's new novel, The Swan Book, which basically looks at Australia. We've had climate change happening, refugee policy is run amok, everything is worse. A young Aboriginal woman, she's mute after a horrible rape. She's living in kind of junkyard swamp, and the only good thing that's happening there is that there's thousands of black swans. And I won't actually tell you any more of the plot because, I mean, she goes on, she marries the Messiah, the first Aboriginal president of Australia. He locks her up in a tower. The plot isn't really the thing. It's the backstory, which is about the legends, Aboriginal legends, European fairy tales and fables of swans. Every poem, painting you've ever known of, and many more. It's in the old and true meaning of the word, it's marvellous. Now, it's time for our classic, brought by Juno, a novel which effectively introduced the English-speaking world to Latin American writer Roberto Bolaño, taking the form of a priest's deathbed confession by night in Chile.
I am dying now, but I still have many things to say. I used to be at peace with myself, quiet and at peace, but it all blew up unexpectedly. That wizened youth is to blame. I was at peace. I am no longer at peace. There are a couple of points that have to be cleared up. So, propped up on one elbow, I will lift my noble, trembling head and rummage through my memories to turn up the deeds that shall vindicate me and belie the slanderous rumors the wizened youth spread in a single stormlit night to sully my name.
Well, By Night in Chile, as it appeared in the English-speaking world exactly 10 years ago. Is that when you read it, or had you already read it?
I'd read it in Spanish, yeah.
And why has it stuck with you so strongly?
It's interesting because, you know, when I must confess, when I selected this book, of course, now I can't remember exactly why I picked it, except that Bolaño is a classic in all his iterations. The impact that Bolaño has had on contemporary writing cannot be exaggerated. There's certainly better books of his. I would say Amulet, I would say Distant Star are novels that are unmatched in their precision and their compression. But really what Chile by Night does is that it sort of gives us, in many ways, the DNA of who this writer is. A writer who is profoundly interested in the national fate of Chile, a country racked by a hyper-cruel American-backed dictatorship. The bodies, the disappeared, the tortured, but on top of it, someone who is also equally moved by the intellectual life of being a poet, by what does it mean to be a writer, what does it mean to be an intellectual in an environment, in a culture that is so fantastically, phantasmagorically cruel. And of course, all of this is being channeled through the sort of slurried recollections of someone who's really at the end of their rope. And so in many ways, it's more of an experiment than I would argue a very successful novella. But for me, because it introduces all of his great themes, it's sort of like one of Shakespeare's early plays that gets all played out finally when we get to something like Tempest. And for me, again, Bolaño is someone to be read because so few writers can sort of pivot around the absolute individual life and have that echo and describe a national culture or a national dilemma in useful ways. Usually the individual story blots out the national one, or the national story hammers down on the individual. But we see even in this book, a book which I think is rather difficult, sort of strange, we see his ability to keep these two vast universes in an interesting conjunction.
And it's I mean, I don't mean this jokingly, the fact that it's so brief, it's so short. I mean, Savage Detectives and 2666, these are huge books. And this, he does what he does so tightly.
Yeah, I mean, the compression certainly is one of the great charms of a book like this. Because imagine if it was 800 pages, it would be incredibly difficult.
Yes. I mean, the fact of the matter is it's one paragraph, isn't it?
Yes.
So, I mean, the actual physical act of reading it is it's interesting because if you don't read it in one session, where do you stop?
Well,
and what do you do when you stop? I mean, I think it sort of almost demands you to read it in one
There
in
are
one
two
session.
paragraphs, but just the second one only has 7 words in it.
Well, that's true, yeah. So you don't read up to that and then go off and have a cup of tea. But it is an extraordinary book. I mean, as you said, it is a bit of a rant. You know, this guy is just expressing everything he can, and I found it very powerful about the complicity of artists and the responsibility of artists to the political events that are going on.
Well, in some ways, he's doing something that I think we're very, very uncomfortable with. Usually, we tend to think of artists and intellectuals. If we don't think too hard, we tend to think of those people as they tend to stand up to tyrannies. We tend to think of writers who are, being imprisoned. We tend to think of writers who are kind of writing against power. But as you're saying, one of the things Bolaño puts his finger on is how deeply dictatorships need storytellers to keep them in power, and how many people become complicit.
And this is actually, to me, it read as the book or the deathbed confession of someone. He was imagining, he'd put on the wolf's clothing and imagined if you had stayed, if you had been complicit, this is the sort of thing you would say.
Gosh, you're all talking about a book I just didn't read. Isn't this interesting? I was really excited to read this book because I'd never read Bolaño, and I thought, great, now I'm going to read it. And I found it, first of all, extremely tough to read. I didn't know if it was the translation or not, but I found the language quite cloying and repetitive. I didn't find it particularly inspirational, and I didn't find that this character of the dying man ever developed at any point. He stuck as a man who talked continually about how important literature was, but never described any of the ways in which literature was important or enlightened anything at all. And little by little, you get to realize that you're looking at a coward, you're looking at a man who isn't going to work in any shape or form to stand up against a political system.
But you're also looking at a second-rate writer. I mean, he's a critic.
Yes, but in terms of, the talking about a voice, you need a voice for a book to pull you through. I didn't like the voice and I didn't like the man, and it was quite hard, therefore, to push myself through because I didn't think he was ever going to tell me anything about himself that I didn't already know from those first early encounters.
Oh, I disagree entirely about the voice, and it is obviously a matter of taste, but it felt like getting onto a swing, and then you stayed on the swing, and then when the book was over, you got off the swing. I thought the voice was beautiful. It felt like being read to. It was so comforting and dreamlike, and the way that he goes in and out of his recollections, you feel like you're completely giving yourself over to falling asleep, to dying as he is. You feel like you're dying along with him. And
But weren't you horrified by what he was saying? I mean, what the tone of the voice, the content was awful.
The style particularly, that I just found that it lulls you into a way that maybe that information is more palatable. So I never found, there were horrific moments in it, but I thought maybe because it is the one paragraph, because you do dip in and out of the past and back into it, you're lulled.
It is very dreamlike.
And then you're pushed out of the book.
Yeah. And there are things within it, partly because they stand out from the dream, which are extraordinary. There's a visit that he takes to, and they're obviously softening him up to see how much he's willing to do. There's a visit he takes to Europe to look at decrepit churches, and there's a fantastic metaphor in it as what he finds is the only people who found a way to handle decrepit churches because the acid rain of pigeon shit is destroying them, is to get a great falcon, and all the priests have falcons which bloodily kill the birds until he reaches one priest who suggests that the birds might be the Holy Spirit, i.e. the congregation, and we're killing them. And there's moments like that which
And they set their falcon on to kill him.
Yes, which are genuinely fabulous, which are genuinely surreal. And so when it hit the surreal for me, it worked. But there was just something about it that felt leaden. Now, that may have been necessary. But you take a risk. You take a risk that you've got to hold your reader.
But if I could just make one thing, what would be very interested, and I would be interested in this, if, for example, especially if you go and read Amulet and read Distant Star, and then think back on this book. Bolaño is someone like Shakespeare, someone that, as you read him, the books begin to deepen in ways that I think are important. And again, I would argue that if I was speaking to a regular audience, I would say, go read Amulet first. And then when you come back to this book, I think you'll begin to see things in it. Because I do think that each reader has to teach each writer has to teach their reader how to read.
Yeah.
And I think by the second or third Bolaño book, it brings skills. I'm not saying that it'll convince you, but I just do think that he's a worthy person of exploring, even in his books which perhaps don't succeed as well.
Do you feel more kindly about it listening to Juno?
I feel very intrigued to read others, and because I was really disappointed, because I had been really looking forward to it.
I mean, if you weren't coming on, would you have given up?
Yes, I would. I would have
Yeah,
given
it
up,
happens.
actually. I would have given up, right? And I would have given up because I would have felt, I don't like this person, I see no journey in this person, I know the self-deception that this person is going into, I know where it's going to end, what am I going to learn from this, apart from the fact that there were people who self-deceived under dictatorships, right?
Quick point. Do you notice that we never meet the victims? We never meet them. We hear about it. It's just interesting.
He's only had
But I
so
think
much time to tell
That's
the
him,
story.
though. That's
yeah.
the character.
That's yes.
This character, I
Yeah.
think, part of his unwillingness to bear witness means that the bodies have to stay off stage. And I think that if you're a person who wants the bodies to come on stage, this book in many ways plays out the drama of a nation that refuses to acknowledge a certain level of political violence. I mean, it's fascinating the way this book resists the actual disinterment of the victims. I mean, it's really chilling, because someone like me who grew up in the shadow of a dictatorship, how hard it is to get the nation to be like, yes, people were disappeared.
It's been fantastic. Thank you very much for bringing that book. And that is our club for another month. A big thank you to tonight's book clubbers. It's been a great discussion. Thank you, Juno, Marique, Jason and Sarah. Well, now, next month, we are joined by Delia Falconer and David Stratton to talk about the birth of Hollywood Tatler journalism, among other things, in Beautiful Ruins by Jess Walter. Delia is bringing The Favourite, a book once lost, now found, Elizabeth Harrower's neglected classic, The Watchtower. So plenty to look forward to. Until then, very happy reading. Thank you so much for your company. Have a great festival and good night.